My first assignment in Moscow was simple. Walk across Red Square at precisely noon. Easy, right? Not with a KGB tail hot on your heels, it wasn't. Every nerve ending felt like it was on fire. I blended in with the tourists, their cameras clicking like nervous crickets. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This wasn't sightseeing, this was espionage, and the stakes were higher than the Kremlin spires. A sea of faces, stoic and unreadable, surrounded me. Were they ordinary citizens, or did their eyes hold the glint of suspicion, the training of the KGB? My hand unconsciously went to my coat pocket, checking for the tiny microfilm canister that held the fate of nations. Just another face in the crowd, I told myself, but the lie tasted like fear in my mouth. I reached the other side of the square, my pace steady, breathing measured. As I turned to leave, a gruff voice stopped me in my tracks. "Comrade, you dropped this." A large hand presented me with a red carnation, its petals velvety soft against the rough calluses of his fingers. A test? A warning? I accepted the flower with a curt nod, my stomach clenching with the knowledge that in this city, nothing was ever what it seemed. They never tell you in spy school how lonely it gets, living undercover. Sure, you learn the language, the customs, the nuances of local life, but it's a performance, a carefully constructed facade. Every conversation is a tightrope walk, every interaction laced with the fear of slipping up. Russian became both my shield and my sword. I devoured Dostoevsky and Pushkin for survival. Each word mastered brought me closer to blending in. Fluency went beyond grammar and vocabulary. It was about understanding the unspoken. I remember once, early on, ordering tea in a local cafe. I used the wrong verb, marking me as an outsider. The old woman behind the counter looked at me, her eyes sharp as shards of ice. "You must be new in town, comrade," she said. I stammered a reply, my face flushing with heat. She smiled then, a surprisingly warm gesture that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Don't worry," she said, handing me my tea. "We all make mistakes. Just be careful who you talk to." Moscow was a city of whispers, where every shadow seemed to conceal a KGB agent and every wall had ears. The feeling of being watched was constant, a suffocating presence that clung to me like a second skin. I quickly learned to vary my routines, to trust no one, and to assume every conversation was being overheard. I'd catch glimpses of them, the watchers, lurking at the edges of my vision, men in drab overcoats, their faces etched with boredom and suspicion. They followed me on foot, in cars, their presence as relentless as the winter wind. Once, in a moment of paranoia, I was convinced they had bugged my apartment. I spent hours meticulously searching every nook and cranny, my heart pounding with each creak of the floorboards. I found nothing, of course, but the fear lingered, a constant reminder of the precariousness of my situation. The psychological pressure was immense. It was like playing a high-stakes game of chess, always anticipating your opponent's next move, knowing that one wrong step could mean game over. Operation Firebird was my first taste of real espionage. Our mission was to obtain the blueprints for a new Soviet fighter jet, codenamed Firebird. The plans were heavily guarded by KGB agents and high-security systems. The key was a low-level clerk in the Ministry of Aviation, drowning in gambling debts. He became my target. I posed as a black market trader and befriended him. We met in smoky back rooms and dingy bars. I dangled the promise of easy money. The handoff was scheduled for a moonless night in a deserted park. The tension was palpable. He arrived clutching a briefcase. We exchanged the package and the cash. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I had the blueprints, but the game was far from over. The life of a spy wasn't all cloak and dagger operations and midnight rendezvous. Sometimes it was about putting on a tuxedo or a cocktail dress and navigating the treacherous waters of embassy parties and diplomatic soirees. These events were minefields of hidden agendas and coded conversations, where vodka flowed freely and secrets were traded like commodities. I became a chameleon, blending into the background, my senses on high alert. I'd eavesdrop on conversations, memorize faces, and gather intelligence from the most innocuous of interactions. A casual remark about a new ballet, a misplaced word about a government official's health, even the gossip swirling around the latest diplomatic scandal, everything held the potential for valuable intel. I remember one particularly lavish party at the British Embassy. The champagne was flowing, the caviar endless, and the air thick with the scent of perfume and intrigue. I found myself cornered by a charming but persistent Soviet diplomat, his eyes twinkling with amusement. We engaged in a harmless dance of small talk and veiled probes, each of us acutely aware of the other's true allegiance. As the evening wore on, I managed to extract a crucial piece of information about a planned Soviet military exercise, a nugget of intelligence that would later prove invaluable. In the world of espionage, trust was a currency more valuable than gold, and just as rare. Every interaction was a potential trap, every smile a mask concealing ulterior motives. I learned to question everything, to doubt even my own instincts. The line between friend and foe blurred, until I wasn't sure who I could trust, if anyone. One of my most difficult tasks was handling double agents, individuals who had been turned and were now feeding information back to the West. These were fragile relationships built on a foundation of deceit and betrayal. I met with them in secret, always aware that our encounters could be compromised at any moment. The fear in their eyes was palpable, a constant reminder of the danger we were all in. I remember one particular asset, a mid-level KGB officer who had become disillusioned with the regime. He provided us with invaluable intelligence, but his conscience came at a heavy price. The KGB was relentless in its pursuit of traitors, and eventually they caught up with him. I never learned his fate, but I still remember the look in his eyes during our last meeting, a mixture of fear and resignation that haunts me to this day. If you want to understand the Russian soul, they say, go to the banya. This traditional sauna is more than just a place to get clean. It's a ritual, a social institution where barriers are broken down along with a good sweat. For me, it was also an unexpected lesson in cultural immersion. My first banya experience was an assault on the senses. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, sweat, and something akin to melting birch leaves. Naked bodies, glistening with sweat, crowded the wooden benches that lined the walls. The heat was stifling, oppressive, a physical manifestation of the weight I carried on my shoulders. I endured the ritualistic beating with birch branches, the feeling akin to being flagellated by 1,000 tiny hands. Then came the plunge into ice-cold water, a shock to the system that left me gasping for air. But as the initial shock wore off, I felt a strange sense of exhilaration, of being cleansed, both physically and mentally. In that moment, surrounded by strangers who had suddenly become companions in suffering, I caught a glimpse of the camaraderie, the raw honesty that lay at the heart of Russian culture. Moscow after dark was a city transformed. The gray, oppressive facade of the Soviet regime seemed to melt away, replaced by a vibrant, if somewhat clandestine, nightlife. Hidden behind unmarked doors and down dimly lit alleys were jazz clubs, underground theaters, and secret speakeasies where vodka flowed and the forbidden was celebrated. These clandestine gatherings were a world away from the official pronouncements of the Kremlin. Here, intellectuals, artists, and dissidents gathered to share their ideas, their frustrations, and their hopes for a different future. Music, poetry, and whispered conversations became acts of defiance, small but significant cracks in the Iron Curtain. I frequented these places not just to gather intelligence, but also to escape the suffocating confines of my double life. The music, the laughter, the sheer energy of these gatherings provided a much-needed release, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit finds a way to shine through. Living a double life takes its toll. The constant lying, the compartmentalization, the fear of exposure, it wears you down, erodes your sense of self. I became a master of disguise, but beneath the masks, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The lines between my real life and my cover identity blurred until I wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. The hardest part was the loneliness. I couldn't confide in anyone, not even my family. They knew I worked for the government, but the true nature of my work remained a closely guarded secret. I'd call them from sterile hotel rooms, my voice carefully neutral, my words devoid of detail. With each conversation, the distance between us grew wider, the chasm of unspoken truths deepening. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, the simple joys of sharing a meal with loved ones. Their world went on without me, a constant reminder of what I was sacrificing for a cause I couldn't even talk about. The guilt was a heavy weight to bear, a constant ache in the pit of my stomach. But I told myself it was a small price to pay for the greater good, for the preservation of freedom. After what felt like a lifetime, my time in Moscow came to an end. I returned to the West, a stranger in my own land. The world I had left behind seemed both familiar and alien, the rhythms of normal life jarring after years spent in a state of heightened awareness. The transition was brutal, the silence deafening. I struggled to readjust, to shed the layers of my cover identity and reclaim the man I used to be. The ghosts of Moscow followed me home, whispering in my ear, reminding me of the secrets I carried, the things I had seen and done. I found solace in the company of fellow spooks, men and women who understood the unique burdens of our profession. We spoke in hushed tones, our conversations laced with code words and knowing glances. We shared a bond forged in the crucible of the Cold War, a shared history that set us apart from the rest of the world. We were the silent warriors, the unseen protectors of freedom, our sacrifices unknown and unacknowledged. Looking back, I'm filled with a strange mix of nostalgia and regret. Moscow, for all its darkness and danger, had gotten under my skin. I missed the adrenaline rush of a successful operation, the thrill of outwitting the KGB. But most of all, I missed the people, the ordinary Russians I had encountered along the way. They were resilient, resourceful, and possessed a wry sense of humor that helped them cope with the absurdities of life under Soviet rule. They taught me to appreciate the simple things, a glass of vodka shared with friends, the warmth of a banya, the quiet beauty of a snowy Moscow morning. I never went back to Russia, but a part of me never left. I still dream of Red Square, of the clatter of trams and the scent of pine needles in the air. And sometimes, when I think no one is watching, I find myself humming an old Russian folk song, a bittersweet melody that speaks of loss and longing, and the enduring strength of the human spirit.